they uncovered $2.7 trillion with a T of Medicare and Medicaid payments that went overseas. I'm Stephanie Keith.
And I am Tara Manjekovic. And we are unapologetically outspoken.
Hey everyone, happy Monday. As usual, we have so much to go through. It's like the news cycle is never ending with this administration. But I want to start out today addressing the same line, which we brought this up, I think, in the last episode, but we're still hearing that same line by every Democrat and mainstream news outlet, which is that we are in a constitutional crisis because of what Trump and Elon Musk are doing with Doge. So there is this clip that's going around social media, and it has Democrats Bill Clinton and Al Gore in 1997 and Barack Obama in 2011 saying they were going to do the same damn thing, except back then they were applauded by the media for it. So I'm going to go ahead and play that clip for you.
This report tells us how to cut waste, cut red tape, streamline the bureaucracy, change procurement rules, change the personnel rules, and create a government that works better and costs less. I've read it, and where it says the president should, the president will.
Among the 800 recommendations, eliminating 12% of the federal workforce, merging some government agencies like the FBI, the DEA, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, closing hundreds of government offices outside Washington.
From the day I took office, one of the commitments that I made to the American people was that we would do a better job here in Washington in rooting out wasteful spending. We thought that it was entirely appropriate for our governments and our agencies to try to root out waste, large and small, in a systematic way. It means cutting some programs that I think are worthy, but we may not be able to afford right now. A lot of the action is in Congress and legislative, but in the meantime, we don't need to wait for Congress in order to do something about wasteful spending that's out there. We haven't seen as much action out of Congress as we'd like, and that's why we launched on our own initiative the campaign to cut waste. And we're going to keep on finding every possible way that we can do that, even if Congress is not acting.
So they were saying the same damn thing. Hypocrites. They're always hypocrites. And, Bill Clinton, he actually did cut 377,000 government jobs, and people were cheering it on. So, don't even listen to them when they try and say that this is some crazy, authoritarian thing that Trump and Elon are doing. Like, this is something that Democrats used to do until they lost their way and left their people behind.
Yeah, what's funny, even MSNBC anchor and former White House press secretary Jen Psaki, she said this is a dumb move by the left to be calling it a constitutional crisis. And she did this interview. She wasn't even supporting Trump at all in the context of what she was saying, but she basically warned that Democrats screaming this phrase from the rooftops every day is the wrong approach.
Yeah, you even have Bill Maher or Maher, however you say his name.
Bill Maher?
Yeah. And Jon Stewart. And I mean, they've been liberal forever, but they're like, this is dumb. Like you're going after the people that are cutting fraud and you're not learning your lesson. Like this is what the American people wanted. And so when you're screaming about it, you're just making the Democrat Party look terrible. I mean, it's crumbling as we speak. So, and then the other thing, we've talked about this a couple times now that the left is, up in arms about is Elon Musk is hiring all these young people on the Doge team and, they're not as experienced and blah, blah, blah. Well, these young people are geniuses. So I have to tell you this story because it's crazy. One of them is Luke Ferriter. He's a 23-year-old guy. He was awarded $700,000 last year because he figured out how to use AI to decode this ancient text that was damaged when Mount Vesuvius erupted and it was like tattered and everything. And this scroll is something that scholars have been trying to decipher for ages. This 23-year-old figured out how to use 3D scans and language learning to put the scroll back together and then decode it. And it's like he's 23 years old and he's figured this out that people have been working on forever. So this got the attention of Peter Thiel, who gave him $100,000 to become a Thiel Fellow, where basically like they can follow their passion and innovate for the future. So these are not your typical young people. These are incredibly, incredibly intelligent people that think outside the box. And if this kid can decode an ancient scroll that has puzzled scholars for ages, then finding corruption in our government is a cakewalk. I mean,
I can't even fathom this because when I think about what I was doing at 23,
I know I
it
was getting
just
drunk
wasn't
like every night.
right.
Oh my God. Yeah. So, and that's just one of them. I want to hear the stories of all of them because I'm sure they all are genius. But anyhow, another interesting thing that's happening is in the past 30 days, 4,000 homes went up for sale in Washington, D.C. So this lowered the median home income price by $139,000. And it's just funny. It's like all I can think is that the rats are jumping ship. And when you look at that combined with the Google searches, like the top Google searches in DC are for criminal defense attorneys. That search is up 400%. And then wipe hard drive is another one, and offshore bank. So
Oh my
it's like,
God.
and we think about the politicians, but I mean, we're talking of hundreds of thousands of like lobbyists and NGOs and people working within these agencies that were all corrupt. They all had their hands in the cookie jar, and now Doge is exposing it. And it's just hilarious because DC is like in a full-fledged state of panic.
Yeah, this is wild. It's 20%. These homes have dropped by 20% from what they were a few months ago. And the Daily Mail reported that according to Redfin, in November of last year, the median home price in DC was $699,000. And now, just a few months later, it's down to $560,000. And there's almost 8,000 homes for sale in the DC metro area right now. And like you said, almost half of those went on the market in the last 30 days. And you know what? Maybe the city of New York should buy them up so that they can house migrants.
I think that's a great idea. Yeah, why don't they do that? You
Well,
never
speaking
know.
of housing, yeah, well, this is kind of off topic, but I thought this was really cool. I saw this in Breitbart, and it was an article about there's a bunch of students at a school in Burnsville, North Carolina, and they've been partnering with an organization called Rebuilding Haulers. And they're making tiny homes in their carpentry class. And it's part of an effort to help the hurricane victims who lost their homes. And I think that's awesome. Like you have the Biden admin that gave them $750, and you have local school kids building them fucking homes.
I think it's great. I think, what a great way to teach kids like the gift of giving back to their community. And I mean, I hope that this is something that other schools see and start implementing. It's like if they're going to be doing carpentry projects and things anyways, like go help people in your local community. And it's just showing kids like you don't have to wait for the government to come save you. Like we can help these people because clearly the government didn't do shit for North Carolina until Trump got in. So that's amazing. These kids,
Yeah,
they
I think
all they all deserve like a medal.
Yeah, I just think it's really cool that they're doing that. And okay, there's so much more that came out this weekend on the Doge front. But I have to start with Elon's post Valentine's Day message that he put on X, and it was also on the Doge website Saturday. It said, Roses are red, violets are blue. Today, Doge and 10 agencies made 586 wasteful contract bids adieu, with a ceiling value of 2.1 billion and 445 million in savings secured. A perfect Valentine's gift for all taxpayers, well earned and deserved.
Oh, that's nice. It even rhymes.
I know. That's a sweet gift, right? So we got to get into the money details. And since we were just talking about housing, let's start with Department of Housing and Urban Development, because on Friday, Elon announced 1.9 billion in misplaced funds that have been recovered from HUD. And do you want to know what these 1.9 billion dollars was for? Administration of financial services.
At a time when homelessness is like a major problem, like a top problem in all of our big cities, the fact that they're wasting $1.9 billion instead of like placing people is just, it's awful. But I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised at all. So last week when we discussed the Social Security fraud, like I thought that was the biggest scandal of the century. But no, nope, it's not. Marjorie Taylor Greene held a press conference where her and her subcommittee team said that they uncovered $2.7 trillion dollars with a T of Medicare and Medicaid payments that went overseas. So that chunk of money that's taken out of every American's paycheck for Medicare, Medicaid was going to other countries to people who obviously shouldn't have been receiving it. And this isn't even Doge. This is from the US Government Accountability Office. And you can find all the details on gao.gov. And so in addition to the 2.7 trillion, there's an estimated 233 to 521 billion dollars that are annually lost to fraud and another 236 million annually lost to improper payments. So the Patriot Dad on TikTok, who has a great account, he brought this whole thing up and was doing the calculations. And he said, if you look at this over a period of 20 years, that's 4.6 to 10 trillion dollars lost. So we're talking almost a third of our total debt just in fraud, just from Medicare and Medicaid alone.
Yeah, and that's why the elites are freaking out about Elon touching Medicare and Medicaid,
Hmm.
and they're making it sound like, oh, they're gonna take it away from, all of the deserving people. No, this is what they're gonna fucking do is get rid of all this fraud. And I want to call attention too to something else funny that Elon posted recently. And because you brought up the Social Security fraud, right?
Yeah.
And so we talked about those numbers last week, and he just posted something I thought was funny. He said, according to the Social Security databases, these are the numbers of people in each age bucket with the death field set to false. Like false, there's no death field. He said, maybe Twilight is real and there are a lot of vampires collecting Social Security.
Oh my God. Yeah. And
Like,
then
we're
where
joking, but
does that money go to like that address or is this just them covering up their fraud? I mean, either way, it's horrendous. It
right. And like, you can sit here and laugh about it because it's so like abysmal and so disturbing that our country is in literally trillions of dollars of debt, like unfathomable amounts of debt. And yet 10 trillion alone is in Medicare and Medicaid fraud.
Mhm.
Like, that's absolutely insane. And oh my gosh, let me get into some of the other spending that we've been doing. Okay. So I mean, Elon must have just been awake all weekend posting because late Saturday night, like after midnight, he posted and he said, US taxpayer dollars were going to be spent on the following items, all of which have been canceled. 10 million for Mozambique voluntary medical male circumcision, 9.7 million for UC Berkeley to develop a cohort of Cambodian youth with enterprise-driven skills, 2.3 million for strengthening independent voices in Cambodia, 32 million to the Prague Civil Society Center, 40 million for gender equality and women's empowerment hub, 14 million for improving public procurement in Serbia, 486 million to the Consortium for Elections and Political Process Strengthening, including 22 million for inclusive and participatory political process in Moldova, and 21 million for voter turnout in India. 29 million to strengthening the political landscape in Bangladesh, $20 million for fiscal federalism in Nepal, $19 million for biodiversity conversation in Nepal, $1.5 million for voter confidence in Liberia, 14 million for social cohesion in Mali, 2.5 million for inclusive democracies in Southern Africa, 47 million for improving learning outcomes in Asia, 2 million to develop sustainable recycling models to increase socioeconomic cohesion among marginalized communities of Kosovo, Roma, Ashkali, and Egypt.
A lot of that sounds
It's
like code for overturning elections and like,
right.
you know, putting people in
Maybe
place
this
politically.
Maybe this is where the Medicare and Medicaid money was going to these other countries.
Yeah, no shit.
Isn't that
Unbelievable.
insane?
And
Yeah. Oh,
it's
wait, but I have,
insane too that this is just one day, like one day
right.
of fraud.
It's absolutely insane. And I have more, okay? So last Wednesday we mentioned the 9 million in cuts at the USDA from the 18 different grants that were all related to DEI, like the gender consultants for the Brazilian forest in Central America. Well, that number is now up to 78 Biden admin contracts that are totaling more than $132 million. And according to the Secretary of Agriculture, Brooke Rollins, there are another 1,000 contracts that are still under review for potential cuts. And similar to the first 9 million, all these contracts, they're almost all for fucking nonsense DEI. So let me just tell you a few of these. 374,000 for a DEI onboarding specialist, 254,000 for diversity dialogue workshops, 298,000 for international development for historically underrepresented communities, 91,000 for African and Middle Eastern and Latin America and Caribbean regions for training, education, and access to professional and economic opportunities for women, and increasing participation in climate change adaptation activities. 33,000 for a neighborhood electric vehicle utility van, and 11,000 for a conference room in Hawaii for a meeting on biodiversity.
You know what I would like to see on this Doge website is how much there should be a running total of how much was under the guise of climate change and how much was under the guise of like diversity, equity, and inclusion stuff. Because it's like everything that they do, they slap
Everything.
these labels on.
Yes. Yeah. And another thing that she announced on Friday was that the USDA canceled 948 employee trainings, 948, 758 of which were focused solely on DEI, and the rest were on what? Environmental justice and gender ideology. And they also cut 277 million in media contracts. And it's like you just mentioned, I don't know why I'm shocked by any of this, but it blows my mind when we look at the insane amount of taxpayer dollars that have been funneled into DEI for the past 4 years while our economy turned to shit, right? And our country's being brainwashed. And it's like, we know the DEI agenda is a total scam. But when you break down the numbers and you actually see where this money is being spent, it's just staggering. It's been what, 3 weeks now that we've been talking about every single episode. We're talking about what Doge is exposing trillions of dollars in DEI propaganda while putting our country in this massive debt. Like, it's fucking criminal. And even though Trump's putting a stop to the spending and all the brainwashing programs, the damage that this agenda has done, not only to our economy, but to our communities with feeding this false narrative of racism and trying to get rid of biological gender and all this DEI shit and all the climate shit, it has done irreparable harm to millions of people, especially kids. And this is going to be long term damage. Like, you look at all the crazy climate activist people, and I'm going to make a very stupid comparison, but do you watch Love is Blind?
No, but literally everyone I talk to asks me that. Like everyone watches it, but I'm the only person in the world that doesn't watch it.
I love that show. It's such a train wreck. I mean, it really is. But there's on this season right now, there is this one girl, and the guy's about to propose to her, and they're in the pods, and she brings up politics, and she repeats the phrase, social causes probably 30 times, and how she can't be with someone who doesn't believe in social causes. And she brings up George Floyd, and I think this season is in Minnesota, so it, hits home hard for her. Mind you, these are all white people. These are all
Oh, of
like
course. Yeah. It's
the
always white people
typical
starting this shit. Yeah.
yes, the typical liberal, like yacht white people are on this show this season. And this poor guy he's like, well, I mean, yeah, I totally get what you're saying. Like, I'm not really into politics. I just don't really, I just try to pretend it doesn't exist. And she's like, I can't be with someone who doesn't believe in social causes. And it just went on for like 20 minutes, this stupid conversation. And in the end, like, this guy's dick was so far between his legs because she emasculated him so much with this
Hmm.
conversation. And it was painful to watch. And to me, she's a prime example of how the DEI agenda has just completely brainwashed and destroyed like a generation of young people.
I
But I
feel
will
like
say
it
this,
gives young people and women a bad name too, because it's
yes.
not all young people and all women that think that. But you would think, based on like watching these shows and stuff and on what you see on like Instagram, that every single woman like hates Trump and every single like young person does. And that's not the case. It's like such a psyop. And just like what we reported in the last episode, how they were working with, I think it was Reuters, on large mass social deception. It's like the
Right.
whole thing, I think, is one big freaking psyop. They probably are funding Love is Blind for her to say that. Like, listen,
I
men,
wouldn't be
if you don't get on
surprised.
board with social causes, you're never going to get married. That's the message.
And I think they did end up getting engaged. And it was just like, I'm watching this and I'm like, oh, dude, big
Your life's over,
mistake.
dude. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. But like on a positive note, on Friday, the acting assistant secretary for civil rights for the Department of Education, his name is Craig Trainer, and he issued a letter to state education officials nationwide directing them to drop the DEI shit or they're going to risk losing federal funding. And I just want to read part of the letter. It says educational institutions have toxically indoctrinated students with the false premise that the United States is built upon systemic and structural racism and advanced discriminatory policies and practices. Proponents of these discriminatory practices have attempted to further justify them, particularly during the past 4 years, under the banner of DEI, smuggling racial stereotypes and explicit race consciousness into everyday training, programming, and discipline. But under any banner, discrimination on the basis of race, color, or national origin has been, and will continue to be illegal. Then he called DEI programs insidious and said that they stigmatize students of certain races based on crude racial stereotypes. And this deprives students of a full educational experience because they're giving racial preference to certain groups and then teaching students that other groups bear what he called unique moral burdens more than others. And he brought up the example of how, like, white and Asian students have been discriminated against, even though many of them come from disadvantaged backgrounds and low income families. And he wrote, in a shameful echo of a darker period in the country's history, many American schools and universities even encourage segregation by race at graduation ceremonies and in dormitories and other facilities. And Stephanie, the craziest thing to me is like all these, social causes and social justice warriors, they fail to understand exactly what he called out in this letter, that this agenda has been illegal all along. Like going back to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, it's been fucking illegal, but it's been like churched up to look like a good thing under the DEI banner. And it's nothing but complete brainwashing. And I hate when people say, like, oh, the DEI agenda is reverse racism. And I know they mean it in a good way, but there's no such thing as reverse racism. Like, racism is fucking racism, no matter how you look at it. And DEI is fucking racism.
Do you ever notice? I see this on social media a lot. The people who are all about DEI are the most racist people.
Yes.
I mean, it by far, and a lot of them are white people, and they say shit that's so fucking racist, but they think they can get away with it because, oh no, I'm promoting DEI. But in
Mhm.
turn, like they're being racist and not just to like other white people, they're being racist towards every single race because they say shit that like completely divides like everything you just listed. That's what they say, but they think it's
When they
okay.
right, when the white fucking privileged person gets on the screen and tells you, if you send them the illegals back, there will be no one to pick your avocados. Like, you're basically just saying you want slave labor, right?
Yes. Yes. That is exactly what the Democrats, the slave owners, said back during the Civil War when they tried ending slavery. That is what they were touting. We're going to lose all of our cheap slave labor. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just, again, we can make a whole book on hypocrisy from the left because it's like
Mhm.
so ridiculous. And of course, they never see it. And when they do see it, they just get angry and throw a temper tantrum because everything's emotional.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's crazy. But something that I think is really big that has kind of been overlooked in the past few days is Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna. She brought the receipts. She had screenshots in a hearing showing that the US State Department in 2021 created instructions on how the military could work with USAID to use race riots to destabilize nations. And she brought up the fact that no one in USAID was elected. So they are essentially people that are working in the shadows to overthrow other nations with no oversight whatsoever. I mean, this is huge because this is proof that there is in fact a shadow government or a deep state or military industrial complex, whatever you want to call it. This is proof that it exists and it is controlling and manipulating things on a global level. And with everything you just said, I think they're doing it in our own country too. I think all this DEI bullshit is exactly what it says, using race riots to destabilize a nation. That is literally
Well,
what's been happening ever since George Floyd.
yeah, go back to all the money I listed earlier that was going to Mozambique and Cambodia and
Hmm.
Serbia and India and Nepal and Southern Africa. Like, fucking millions adding up to be billions of dollars in quote DEI that are going to these foreign countries that are just being handled by NGOs. And I guarantee you it's all connected to USAID. Like, this is one big giant fucking ball of corruption.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a big psyop by this shadow government.
Yeah, that's insane. And since you brought up the military, I have to bring up this story because I thought this was interesting. So there's some really shady shit being reported with the Army. And there was an investigative report from military.com that found millions of dollars that were supposed to be spent on food for soldiers as part of their, they call it BAS, is their basic allowance for subsistence. And this money was not spent on food, it was spent somewhere else. So, according to the report, out of the 225 million that was supposed to go to this BAS program, only 74 million of that went to food. And the reason this is such a big deal is because the soldiers are paying for it. Like, it's money coming out of their pockets, at least for the soldiers who live in the barracks, because they automatically get $460 taken out of their paychecks every month to cover food costs. So this is essentially the army stealing money from its own soldiers.
Okay, I had no idea that the soldiers had to pay for their own food. I mean, are you kidding me? Like, they are giving themselves over to our government and they can't even feed them. They're taking money out of their paycheck for food. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. And I mean, now, I mean, granted, the government's giving them that money, but then it's taking that money right back from them, right? And so this report revealed that this is just last year in 2024. Records from the 11 largest military bases show that 151 million out of that 224 million was not spent on food. And then I read an article in the New York Post that was saying the actual number is probably even higher because the Army operates 104 garrisons and they all use the same program. And they gave the example of Fort Stewart in Georgia, where $17 million was collected from soldiers there. Only 2.1 million of it was spent on feeding them, which means 87% of the money went somewhere else. And this report also indicated that some of our military bases are experiencing, quote, pervasive food shortages, and gave the example of Fort Carson, Colorado, where apparently, due to a lack of food, soldiers were reportedly fed lima beans and toast. And service members from all over the country apparently frequently comment on the poor food quality, saying, the meat is undercooked, meals are not seasoned, there's a lack of fresh ingredients and unhealthy menu options. And okay, I completely understand how this would be the case if they were deployed and it was a war and they were in the middle of a battlefield and you have MREs and some shitty food, right? But there's really no excuse for being served lima beans and toast on base when 151 million in food funds have disappeared. And the question is, where did the money go? And well, nobody seems to know. Nobody knows. And I guess Congress is doing an investigation and demanding answers. And I guarantee you they're going to find a similar problem in other branches of the military because I don't think this is just the Army.
Well, yeah, I mean, look at how they found that millions of dollars in expenses were for sushi for Pentagon employees, but they can't feed them a basic meal. I mean, and then you're sending all this money overseas, but you can't feed our soldiers who are like
Who are
putting their
paying for
life on
it?
hold for this country. Yeah, and you're making them pay for it. I mean, if there's something that's really going to piss you off, it's that. It's that, and then stealing money from Medicare from elderly people who need it the most. It's just unbelievable. And again, like, I am shocked because I knew there was fraud and corruption, but at this level, I don't think anyone could have
Yeah.
fathomed just how bad it really was. And like, I can't wait to see what fraud they uncover when they go through the VA. Because I mean, we
Yeah.
hear stories all the time. I'm sure there's a ton of money funneled through there because the care they receive is awful. They make people wait, months to get cancer treatment. It's just terrible. And if anyone deserves better, it's our soldiers and our veterans. And it's awful to hear this stuff and to know this has been taking place for at least the past 4 years. Who knows before that?
I guarantee you it's been going on much longer, but the increase in fraud and spending over the last 4 years is like something we've never seen before. I mean,
Yeah.
it's so insane. And like you said, once they start exposing fraud that's going on in the VA, in the IRS, other major areas of our government where you're really just completely fucking over the American people. And we're just going to see more and more. I mean, again, every single episode, we're talking about the latest fraud that's being uncovered, right? And speaking of fraud, another thing that is coming out of Congress right now, um, there's the Pandemic Unemployment and Fraud Enforcement Act that was introduced by Rep. Jason Smith from Missouri. And this act would provide a 5 year extension on the statute of limitations for criminally prosecuting people who committed unemployment insurance fraud during COVID, right? So I was reading in just the news that according to the DOJ, there are still 157,000 open unemployment insurance fraud complaints and 1,648 open investigations. And if no congressional action is taken, the current statute will expire on March 27th. And the Government Accountability Office estimates that there's more than $100 billion in unemployment benefits that were lost due to fraud during COVID. And how much of that have they recovered, Stephanie? 5 billion of the 100 billion.
Oh man, I wish I could have found it, but a while back, somebody had went through all these celebrities and how they were like huge on getting this money. And like they were saying like, "Oh, it's for the landscapers on my property so I can keep them hired during COVID." I mean, we're talking actors, A-list actors that are worth hundreds of millions of dollars that took advantage of this and got tens of millions of dollars so they could keep their landscaping staff and like their servants employed. I mean, it's absolutely insane. And I hope they go after each and every one of them. It's sick. But speaking of unemployment benefits, ABC News got this leaked audio from the Office of Personnel Management where the director had a call with probationary employees who refused the deferred resignation plan. And on the call, he told them they were terminated. And so ABC News posts this, I think to try and make Trump look bad, like, oh, look at all these jobs he's cutting, even though Bill Clinton did the same thing. But I was reading the comments and no one felt bad for them. Everyone was saying, welcome to the real world. This happens every single day in the private sector. And I can attest to that because when I was in the corporate world, we waited by the phone every single Christmas to see if we still had a job.
Mhm.
So after seeing all of this like wasteful spending and fraud, I'm sure we're going to be seeing a lot more cuts across the government. And, it's like this was personnel management. They were hiring a lot of these people and letting them get away with this shit. So I'm sorry, like it sucks. I'm sure there's some good people that lost their job, but that's what the rest of us have been dealing with in the real world for a long time.
Oh my God. I remember when I worked at Disney, there were like a couple of the animators, and one guy had been there almost 30 years, I think,
Mm-hmm.
and he got terminated. I
Yep.
remember someone right before they hit 20 got terminated. And it's like, yeah, this is the real world. This is what happens in corporate America. And you were given an option to resign and get paid a shit ton of money. And I don't know anyone that worked where I ever worked that got laid off or fired, got 8 months of compensation and benefits.
Right. Yeah. Like I bet they feel stupid not taking that, but it's like, there's going to be a lot more cuts coming. So go ahead, ABC, post it because I think in the comments it's showing that the people wanted this. We voted for this. And
Yeah.
we're not going to, feel bad about it like after seeing all this fraud and corruption that took place. You got to weed the people out.
Yeah. And speaking of weeding out, corrupt NGOs, right? I got to bring up this story because this happened in one of our favorite corrupt shit show blue cities that we like to talk about, New York. In New York City, the founder of a nonprofit called Exodus Transitional Community that was supposed to be, quote unquote, helping to place inmates in hotels during COVID to reduce jail populations and slow the spread, which we know didn't help. But anyway, this guy, his name's Julio Medina. He was given $122 million in public funds from the mayor's office to operate these hotels from June 2020 to December 2023. Well, he was just indicted by the Brooklyn U.S. Attorney's Office last week for funneling 51 million of that 122 million in public funding to two shady businesses in exchange for kickbacks, including $2.5 million worth of bribes that resulted in these other business owners buying him two homes, luxury car, and giving him quite literally stacks of cash. And the two co-defendants are also shady as fuck. One is Christopher Dantzler, whose company was a fraudulent security services business. This guy was supposed to be providing security services at the hotels, but his business wasn't even a licensed security company and it didn't provide any services. And then the other is a female named Wee Hong Hu, and her company ran two hotels in Queens and was supposed to be providing food services. So, again, here's an example with a totally bullshit nonprofit that was given $122 million in taxpayer money from the government of New York that just went into the pockets of these bullshit NGOs.
I have to say, I am genuinely shocked that this is in New York City where they're being prosecuted. Because New
Mm-hmm.
York, it's like you get away with all this bullshit, but it's
Yeah.
about time. And I hope this is the first of many of these cases where we see criminal charges because it's a crime. You cannot steal money. Like, this is insane. $122 million. dollars.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to completely switch gears for a second because there's a lot happening on the global front right now. So, JD Vance, he's been all over Europe, kicking ass, taking names. He's doing a great job. Most recently, he was at the Munich summit. And oh my God, like everyone's talking about this in this speech that he gave. So it started out with the president of the EU Commission, and she gave a speech basically saying that Trump's threats of tariffs on Europe is a threat to the EU and that they're going to respond accordingly. So she's kind of like threatening Trump. So JD Vance gets on stage after her and gave a freaking epic speech. It's super long, so I'm only going to play a clip, but I feel like everyone should go look it up on YouTube or social media and watch the whole thing. But here's just a taste of what he said.
We gather at this conference, of course, to discuss security. And normally we mean threats to our external security. I see many great military leaders gathered here today. But while the Trump administration is very concerned with European security and believes that we can come to a reasonable settlement between Russia and Ukraine, and we also believe that it's important in the coming years for Europe to step up in a big way to provide for its own defense, the threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America. This is a security conference, and I'm sure you all came here prepared to talk about how exactly you intend to increase defense spending over the next few years in line with some new target. And that's great, because as President Trump has made abundantly clear, he believes that our European friends must play a bigger role in the future of this continent. We don't think, you hear this term, burden sharing, but we think it's an important part of being in a shared alliance together that the Europeans step up while America focuses on areas of the world that are in great danger.
Yeah, so they're going to go and threaten Trump. And he's like, okay, well, we're the only ones contributing to this shared alliance. They all rely on the US military. How about you work on your own defense? And we'll go from there. And he went out to call out like specific countries for straying away from our shared values like religious freedom. He explained how open borders with no vetting of migrants has threatened the lives of their citizens. He brought up the terror attack that happened the day prior in Munich, where an Afghan asylum seeker drove his car into a crowd, injuring 39 people. He called out individual countries for censorship and arresting their own citizens for things like social media posts. He brought up a really good point that I think drove the whole thing home. He asked, during Soviet times, which side was the one that censored dissidents, closed churches, and, oh shoot, I messed up the last part, and canceled, I don't know what it was. Shoot, it was so good too. I messed up my notes. But he basically brought up how it was the Soviets. It was the quote unquote bad guys that were the ones out there with censorship and, not allowing things like religious freedom. Oh, and closed elections. That was the other thing. So, anyhow, he says all of this. And the audience, when they pan the audience, I mean, these European leaders were pissed, not happy at all. And so now, the MSM is saying, oh, he's feeding into all of these far right extremists. And of course, as usual, they're comparing it to Vance being like a Nazi or Hitler, like they always do. And so I'm going to play one other clip because I want you to hear Marco Rubio destroy this narrative that CBS is pushing.
In a country where free speech was weaponized to conduct a genocide. And he met with the head of a political party that has far-right views and some historic ties to extreme groups. The context of that was changing the tone of it. And you know that the censorship was specifically about the right.
No, I have to disagree with you. Free speech was not used to conduct a genocide. The genocide was conducted by an authoritarian Nazi regime that happened to also be genocidal because they hated Jews and they hated minorities and they hated those that they had a list of people they hated, but primarily the Jews. There was no free speech in Nazi Germany. There was none. There was also no opposition in Nazi Germany. They were a sole and only party that governed that country. So that's not an accurate reflection of history.
Standing
I thought that was great because he's basically saying, like, maybe you're the Nazis because the Nazis had total censorship. They didn't tolerate any views outside of their own, and they hated Jews. And guess what? In today's world, that's the left. That's the Democrat Party.
This is really interesting because Germany is going into their final week of election campaigning starting today. And when JD Vance spoke, like it sparked a lot of controversy in the country. It actually resulted in thousands of demonstrators, like tens of thousands of demonstrators, like poured into the streets of Berlin on Sunday. And it was because of comments that were made after what was said by JD Vance. And like this whole thing with immigration and his comments on that, and him saying that, Germany has to drop when he said like there's no room for firewalls or something. And so you had the which party is it? Friedrich Merz. He's a leader of one of the parties that's vying for leadership in Germany. And he was saying, I will not allow an American vice president to tell me who I can talk to here in Germany. And then like the conservative side was like, oh, he's a conservative candidate. I think it's the CDU party. And he's like, will not tolerate the interference. And then same thing with the current chancellor, Olaf Scholz. He was like, Vance's comments are unacceptable and there's no cooperation. And so it's like it's causing issues, which honestly I think is great because we need to stand up for what we believe in and be a fucking leader in the
Yeah.
world. And that is to speak out against censorship. And on the war front with Ukraine, I think this is going to be interesting too, because talks between the US and Russia are reportedly going to start this week in Saudi Arabia. And so Macron, the president of France, he's supposed to be hosting an emergency summit in Paris to talk about Ukraine starting today. And the whole reason that they're doing this um, is because of the US announcing over the weekend that Europe is going to be left out of, the key peace talks regarding Russia's invasion. And so now European leaders are getting together and they're going to discuss the possibility of granting Ukraine NATO membership automatically if Putin breaches whatever peace deal is reached. So I know we're going to have a lot more to talk about on the international front in the coming weeks.
It's just such bullshit because all of this started because Putin continually warned, stop bringing NATO up to my doorstep. And they kept pushing and kept pushing. And now they're going to push more because they want war. They're part of this whole military industrial complex. And yeah, they're pissed that Trump is ending it. So it's just crazy. But again, that's why I think everyone should go listen to the full speech from JD Vance because you hear people talking about like how dare he? But when you listen to the speech, all he's saying is like America is going to start focusing on America and
Yep.
we're done just handing money to you guys when you're not contributing anything else. Like be a big
Yeah,
boy, go and form your own military.
Europe, you're your own fucking continent. Like,
Yeah.
figure it out, help each other out. Don't rely on the United States for everything.
Yeah, the gravy train is over.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. But what are they going to do about it? I've been listening to all these people who are going over the military capability in Europe, and it's like they'll have weapons, but they don't have the satellites to use the weapons. They have
Right.
planes, but they don't have like the whatever tracking devices on them. So it's like they're so far behind, they're in no room to negotiate anything.
I don't remember who this was. I think it was a Tucker interview. I don't know. I listen to so many podcasts. But I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about how it doesn't matter how much equipment we give to Ukraine or how much money we give to Ukraine. They don't have the fucking people to man the equipment or to go to war. And they're
No.
never going to win against Russia because Russia just continually, and he was saying, like, this is historically, I think it was Megyn Kelly's podcast. Historically, if you look at World War I and World War II, Russia started weak and grew stronger as the war went on. And the exact same thing fucking happened with the Ukraine war. And they continue to get stronger and they have the manpower, and Ukraine just doesn't. So, unless other countries come in and fight for Ukraine and give their, men to go and fight, like
And
they have no
Europe won't.
chance.
They don't want to contribute
Right.
anything. They want the
Right.
US to do everything, and it's
Mhm.
ending. And, it's crazy because they're all going to try and push fear when the reality is Trump is like quite literally stopping the war,
Right.
stopping the possibility of a world war and a nuclear war, and they want to bitch and complain about it.
Yeah, and I don't know which outlet this was either because I just read it this morning, but maybe it was Fox News. I don't know. Um, One of the reporters was saying that in conversations separately with Putin and with Zelensky, they both admitted that Trump is the only person who can bring an end to this war.
Yeah. Well, it's true. I mean, clearly Biden didn't do anything, and neither did anyone in Europe. They just fed the beast and poked the
Mhm.
bear, and they want an endless war, and they're not going to get it this time. So I don't know. It's interesting. We'll have to keep everyone posted though, because Europe, I mean, they're all going to push against this, but again, what leverage do they have at this point?
Yeah. Oh,
So,
oh, and Tucker did a great interview on, I don't know, was it the weekend or earlier this week with Viktor Orban. Um,
oh, the Polish leader,
Hungarian,
Hungary. Yeah.
Hungary. Yeah,
Okay, got it.
you should go check it out, and everyone else should go check it out because it was really good. And he's always been very outspoken, like the only
Hmm.
one in the fucking EU that's outspoken, the only one in NATO who has fucking common sense. And
Yeah.
so now, he and Trump are the only ones that have common sense. So anyway, it was a great interview. You should listen to it.
Hmm. Okay, well, I'll check that out. Well, it's only Monday, and
I
that
know.
was a lot to cover. And I'm sure there's going to be just as much for Wednesday and Friday because it's just
Yeah.
insane. They're really working hard to get things back to normal. So,
Yep.
thanks everyone for tuning in. Have a great week, and we'll see you back here on Wednesday.